बैक टू अनदर वीडियो और आपका आज की वीडियो
स्वागत है।
और आज हम लोग देखने जा रहे हैं द रणवीर शो के पॉडकास्ट का सेकंड पार्ट जो हम लोगों ने कल मल्टी यूनिवर्स का देखा था और आज हम इसकी सेकंड पार्ट देखने जा रहे हैं। तो टाइटल तो मैंने आपको बता दिया है, तो चलिए अभी सीधा वीडियो देखते हैं। लेकिन उससे पहले
इस वीडियो के चैनल का ओरिजिनल लिंक आपको मेरी वीडियो की डिस्क्रिप्शन मिल जाएगा। सब्सक्राइब करें, लाइक करें, शेयर करें, फॉलो करें इनके चैनल को। उस क्लिक में लोग चैनल का लिंक, इंस्टाग्राम का लिंक भी हमारी वीडियो की डिस्क्रिप्शन मिल जाएगा। सब्सक्राइब करें, लाइक करें, शेयर करें, फॉलो करें।
चलिए देख लेते हैं ये वीडियो।
Yeah, I think what people don't understand about botanical sciences, and this I learned from Dr. Mark Plotkin, one of the world's most well-renowned botanists, so much of ancient botany is now lost. True. What I also found out from a Himalayan explorer on the show, that's why I love doing this podcast, because cool knowledge like this just stays with me. What I found out from that Himalayan explorer was that there are a lot of shrubs and plants hidden deep inside the Himalayas, probably under the snow, that are still not rediscovered. Right. But you talk to the locals and they have some knowledge about those plants. Not complete knowledge, but they have some knowledge.
Of course.
They know that this plant does this plant does that. And those plants have probably not even been discovered by science.
Yes.
Yet.
Yes.
And there is research ongoing about those plants.
Right.
Now, maybe som could be derived from one of those unknown plants.
Definitely. I think we've just lost the identification. It definitely still exists. And there's very interesting descriptions where it's found. It's found in the mountain regions. That is why it's difficult to access. So it's found in the Himalayan mountains, and it probably extended right from Tibet to Afghanistan, the range.
Like the story in Ramayana.
Of the Sanjeevani. But Sanjeevani was a different herb.
What do you think that was as a doctor?
Not really sure, but again, there's not just one herb that's described in the Ramayana. Hanuman is actually sent to bring 4 different herbs.
Okay.
And he goes twice.
Okay.
To the mountains to get the herbs. And so one of these is Sanjeevani. But there are 3 other herbs that are described in the Valmiki Ramayana. We just get the, so the Ramayana that we know is more of the Ramcharitmanas version. Valmiki Ramayana has many, many differences, which is the actual original depiction of the Ramayana. So there are 4 different herbs that Hanuman goes to get. But Soma was till recently, and it's very interestingly, the Persians, the Parsis we have in Mumbai, they have a Homa ceremony, which is similar to the Soma ceremony that used to be done by the Vedic people. And the Indian and the Iranian, the Vedic and the Iranian civilizations developed almost at the same time. But they were probably antagonists.
Oh, really?
Yes.
They were enemies.
They were enemies, more or less, yes.
Wow.
Because for us, the Asurs are the demons, right? For the Parsis, for the Zoroastrians, Devas were the demons.
Oh.
Yeah. So they were probably enemies, enemy tribes. But they grew in the same environment. They were from the same stock of people. Same languages, the Indo-European languages, Indo-European culture. That's why the stories are similar. The language is very similar. And the Parsis even today have a Hauma ceremony. Okay. And again, it involves extracting juice from a stalk, from a plant, which is again filtered. There's very specific apparatus to do that. And it's a proper ceremony. It's the same Soma ceremony in the Vedas. Okay. And again, this stock that they use for this, till recent times, it used to be imported from Afghanistan. So there was a very specific geography where Soma was available. And that is why we've lost the connect. And since partition, of course, we would not have had access. And I don't think a lot of people were even interested in finding out, which is very unfortunate that a lot of people in India, we turned so westernized immediately right after independence that, being educated in English became the parameter for your knowledge. And all the knowledge that the regional languages had, the literature that regional languages had, all the knowledge in Sanskrit, it was forgotten. Today, how many people know Sanskrit? But if you can read Sanskrit, if you can understand Sanskrit and you can read the scriptures, there's so much more research that can happen, right? So I think that's where Soma comes from. It's definitely, a lot of people again interpret it in a different way, that it was a metaphysical concept. It was more about, the joy of discovering yourself when you're in meditation. It may be so, because Soma has a dual entity. It's also called, Soma is also the name of the moon god. Chandrama is also called Soma. But there's definitely a plant, because the entire 9th mandal is dedicated to its extraction, its filtration, it's so poetic. The Rig Veda is very poetic. beautiful verses that talk about the sieve that is used to filter the extract. It's supposed to have 10 holes, probably. That's why it's called the 10 maidens. And you see the Parsis use a similar apparatus, a similar sieve used today. So even though soma extraction and the ceremony did not survive in our country, it did survive in the neighboring civilization.
Yeah, and also speaking specifically about asuras, what people don't understand is if you actually get into Vishnu Puran or just the study of the Puranas, asuras aren't painted as completely evil.
Yes.
They're grey.
Yes.
Just like us. If you think you are white, that's not true either. You're also grey.
Completely.
So it was just probably two warring tribes which are lost in that 70,000 BC to 10,000 BC time period.
Completely. And again, coming back to science, there were also the ice ages that happened in between. And a lot of history got lost because of the ice ages as well.
So, one second. Like, the Earth has cooling periods and warming periods. We're currently in a warming period.
Yes.
That's why global warming is catching on as much as it is. We are just accelerating it through pollution, etc.
Yes, it is bound to happen even otherwise.
Yeah, but the Earth has, scientifically speaking, warming periods and cooling periods. What I do know is that the Ice Age was the peak of a cooling period, and then therefore it melted away, which began the warming period.
Right.
What I want to ask you is that, are you saying that we actually, probably our culture, like Indian culture, went through a warming period even before?
Definitely. Okay. So, and again, Ranveer, there are very fascinating verses in the Rig Veda, and Bal Gangadhar Tilak, who's a well-known freedom fighter, he was also a scholar. And he wrote this amazing book called The Arctic Home of the Vedas. So, according to him and his analysis of the Vedic verses, some of the depictions are possible only if these people lived on the North Pole or in the Arctic zone.
Wow.
Because there are descriptions of nights being 6 months long, days being 6 months long, which happens only at the poles, right? There's descriptions that of multiple dawns emerging. And that's a phenomena apparently that is witnessed at the pole. That sky gets lighter one arc at a time.
As in the colors keep switching from one part of the sky to another.
Yeah, as in the brightness starts coming one arc at a time because you're at the top of the globe. So you see a circle of light emerging. Dawn is a circle of light.
Okay.
So and similar verses he's interpreted, and I don't have any comment on his interpretations, but he was a well-known scholar, right? And according to him, he believed that if not the entire tribe of Vedic people, at least the rishis used to live there at the North Pole or in the Arctic zone. So that is where the civilization used to be. But when the Ice Age happened, people had to obviously move southwards towards the equator.
Just want to stop you there and throw in some science.
Yeah.
If people are thinking that these kind of descriptions are beyond their perception, I want to highlight someone called Wim Hof, who's called the Iceman, who has learned to use pranayam and breath control to control body temperatures.
Right.
And he's known to actually visit Arctic regions, places with a lot of snow, sub-zero temperatures, and roam around shirtless there. Very comfortably. And he trains people in these breathing techniques and how you can alter your own body temperature.
We see sadhus doing that at Kedarnath and the Himalayas.
He attributes it to what he's learned from Indian culture.
Right.
And breath work. Again.
Makes sense.
So, go on.
But not even that, you don't really need to get into that as well, because before the Ice Age, the poles had a much more temperate climate. They were not covered with snow. So the poles had a very, very habitable zone. So the northern pole, at least southern pole, I'm not really sure what happened to Antarctica, but at least the Arctic zone was much more habitable. There was a possibility of civilization being there. But as the winter would have started, people would have started migrating. And, people say that, how could the ancient civilizations have traveled so far? Vedas are full of descriptions of rides on boats in the oceans. There are gods like the Ashwini Kumars who are specially prayed to when people are going out into the sea. So, and of course, there are descriptions of long journeys, etc. So, a lot of people, a lot of scholars believe that, it was a habitable zone. When the Ice Age started, probably people started moving downwards. And again, there's a very fascinating story of a theory, rather. There's this out of Africa theory of the origins of humanity. It is believed, geneticists believe that, the first human beings came out in East Africa. the proper Homo sapiens, the chromosomes that we have for Homo sapiens, they emerged first in East Africa, and from there humanity started moving out. So now, very interestingly, if you go back into Indian history, genetics, you see that the hominids, the African origin human beings, they came to India around 60,000 BC. Okay, and a lot of genetic studies show that it was these populations that were living in India that they started migrating to the other parts of the world. There would have been branches that went to Europe. There would have been branches that went to the northern parts, but most of these did not survive because of the Ice Age. So it was the branch out of Africa branch that was in the tropical zone that survived, and it is responsible for populating the entire world. So people who came out of Africa into the Middle East and India, the tropical zone, these were the ones who further migrated into other countries like Russia, Siberia, and America and Russia, they were connected before the Ice Age.
Yeah.
They were connected with the Bering Bridge.
Strait.
Yeah, it's Bering Strait now.
But it used to be
it used to be Bering Bridge. And this is a scientific concept that, human beings passed from there into the American continent. So, and that is why you see the Native Americans, they look so much like the
Japanese.
Exactly. Like the Japanese or the Chinese, the Mongoloid races, right? So,
and also, it's not just the Native Americans. That migration happened all the way down to South America, into Chile. You see modern Chilean people.
Yes.
You see so many South Americans.
Yes.
They are, like, I'm talking about the ethnic South Americans, because there was also a lot of European influence, African influence.
True.
But you have this whole Mongoloid looking
right.
part
the
of South
original
America.
inhabitants of the continent. And this happened just about 14,000 years ago. So imagine, India got people living here at least 60,000 years ago, whereas this actually became the new world because human beings reached there about 15,000 years ago, the Americas, So between this duration, a lot of stuff happened. There was ice ages, and whenever there's an ice age, water is drawn back from the seas, from the water bodies. Right, because it gets frozen. It gets frozen, so the sea levels go down. Imagine if there's a period when there is about, say about a 5,000 or 10,000 period, the sea level is down, and there's civilizations that spring around the coasts. Civilization always starts near water sources, right? It's always along the rivers or along the coasts. Biggest cities in the world historically have been along the coast or along major rivers. The entire Indus Valley civilization was around Indus and Saraswati River, which is now discovered. So these civilizations which would have emerged in those coastal areas, as soon as the meltdown started, water level started rising, and these places would have got flooded. And that is the reason you have the story of a global deluge in all world mythologies.
Atlantis.
Everywhere. Dwarka. And these are still later. But even the earlier religions, Mesopotamia, Sumeria, African native mythologies, the Native American mythologies, right up to Philippines from, South America. Everybody has a story about the global deluge. Because it clearly points out, there's a scientific thing, right? That ice ages do happen, meltdown does happen, and the water levels do rise.
And we've still not discovered so much of even recent history. So imagine how much ancient history is not discovered.
So definitely our culture, I believe, was one of those, they're called antediluvian, before the flood culture. So this was definitely one of the antediluvian cultures. And whatever remained, so we have this beautiful story of Manu, where, the Matsya avatar of Lord Vishnu. So Manu is the leader of mankind, okay? And there's this story of the Vevaswat Manu, who's the current Manu, him being visited by a small fish when he was doing his prayers in the sea. Okay, he was somewhere in the southern part of the country, and he was doing his morning prayers, and he just takes water in his palm and do the morning prayers, and he sees this tiny fish in his hand, and the fish is talking to him, and the fish says that, listen, I'm very tiny and I don't want to be in this water body. There are bigger fishes who can eat me. Please take me home. Manu is a kind soul. He takes the fish home, puts it in a kamandal. Okay. within a few hours, the fish is big enough to pop out of the kamandal, and she's like, I will not survive here, put me in a bigger vessel. He keeps changing the place where he puts the fish, from a bigger vessel to ultimately a pond, and ultimately he has to take the fish through a water body to the ocean. And then he has this question in his mind, that who are you? In one day you grew so much, you're definitely not a fish. And that's when the fish says that I'm Vishnu, and I've come here to warn that there will be a global deluge, and everything as you know it will get submerged. So you have to get all the relevant, plants and animal species, and I'll send a boat. So it's very similar to Noah's Ark story, but Noah was supposed to build a boat. In this story, Vishnu says that I'll send a boat, but you get everything ready, and you get the Saptarishis with you, because they are responsible for passing on the knowledge. So even if you have all the raw material, but you do not have the knowledge to use it, what good is a civilization, right? Imagine what would happen today if we have a nuclear war and we do not have any records left, right? Just as what you said happened with our civilization, thousands of years ago because of invasions. The Nalanda University was, I think, burning for 11 or 13 days or so, right? So imagine the number of books, the manuscripts, the paper that was burnt there, so much knowledge lost. What happens when we lose that knowledge? You have to start again from the beginning.
Also want to highlight the modern day internet. People visualize the internet as this ball in the air, or these electronic bits in
cloud.
In the cloud. What they don't understand is that the internet is made up of servers and wires.
Yes.
And they say that there are actual threats to the nature of the internet because of solar winds.
Right.
So the sun, if you actually wear, what are those really dark glasses called, where you look at the sun and you know what I'm talking about, right? Like during an eclipse, you're supposed to wear those.
Yes, the X-ray glasses.
Solar something it's called. Forget it. Never mind. Those super dark glasses. So if you look at the sun with those glasses, you'll actually see these big rings of fire around the sun.
Right.
Like kind of like loops which are just like coming out of the sun.
Yes.
They also emanate a lot of heat, a lot of nuclear energy. They emanate just a lot of basically
radiation. A lot of radiation which can easily disrupt the satellite communication that we have today.
And now if one of those loops is strong enough, which is totally capable of being,
definitely.
because the sun is a nuclear reactor and there are random nuclear reactions that are happening inside it. Now, if one of those radiations are strong enough and they make their way to Earth and they make their way through the Earth's atmosphere and it hits all our electric lines, our wires, our servers, we'll actually probably lose the
land
internet.
In the dark zones, dark ages again.
So these podcasts, everything we stored online, which we think is there forever,
everything is gone.
Hold up. Never know if that's going to happen. What happened to my career, sir? No, I'm kidding. But and just wanted to highlight that all these things that we hear about, these crazy brain exercises that we do, don't think that it's beyond reach.
Nothing is permanent.
Don't think that just because we scientifically advanced so much that we can't be destroyed in a second.
Right.
There's I think it's a Kabir ka doha which says that if you take your life for granted, remember that for God or for the universe, life is like one hair on a scalp and it can just be plucked out.
Easily.
So that's the actual nature of human life. But go on, this became philosophical.
No, that's good because it's quite relevant, right? I mean, it's very, it tells you again, how infinitesimal you are. Just in your own solar system, you're nobody, right? And just one emission from the sun, which is actually, as you said, a nuclear ball, right? It can send us back to the dark ages.
Right? If dinosaurs went extinct, who
exactly, who are we? So with all our scientific intellect and developments and evolution of technology and everything, we are still susceptible to it. So imagine when that happens, when that loss of transmission happens, then you are left with nothing. That is why Vishnu says, keep the Saptarishis with you. So when Vishnu emerges as the Matsya again, and he has a horn, the fish has a horn on its head, okay, and with which they tie the boat using Vasuki. And that discussion that Vishnu gives them in that night of darkness where it's water everywhere, that's the Matsya Puran. That's the most recent Puran to have come to us. So in which they talk about everything of creation, of how things have been, how things will be. So this clearly, if you go scientifically, even if you don't believe in a giant fish saving humanity, there is a definite point towards a geographical event where there was inundation all over the globe, and some lucky people survived and they had the knowledge to continue their civilization.
It must have been a solar flare. Must have been a...
Could be tectonic upheavals, could be, again, as I said, ice age meltdown, could be anything, right? Our globe, Earth, is such an unpredictable entity. Suddenly you have, there's this ring of fire in the Pacific Ocean. There's where these tectonic plates meet. Wherever the tectonic plates meet, there's a more likelihood of earthquakes and volcanoes emerging. And again, interestingly, just because I got reminded of this, so there's this, the scriptures talk about something called mare is a female horse, a mare-shaped fire under the water. This was stored under the water to prevent destruction. Okay, so there was a rishi called Aurva because of various reasons, and it's related to the book that you were reading, Parshuram. So some circumstances happen, and this rishi, he's released this massive destructive energy which can burn the entire planet, and it needs to be taken care of. So it is buried underwater. And what do you think scientifically it could represent? The submarine volcanoes, right? So, and it says, the scriptures say that when pralay happens, ultimately when destruction happens, it will be this underwater fire that will engulf the planet. So it probably predicts such a catastrophic volcanic event emanating from the waterbed, not from the land, but from the oceans. That will probably give rise to tsunamis, it can give rise to earthquakes, it can actually lead to emissions in the air. If just the atmosphere is blocked, we can't get sunlight, everything will die.
I think that's also happened in ancient history.
Exactly.
Where there's been a volcanic eruption, I believe, out of somewhere in Indonesia or the Philippines.
Yes.
Where the earth was covered in ash.
Yes.
Because sunlight was, everything died.
Exactly.
Apocalypse.
So that has happened, So imagine if such an event happens, what is the continuation that we have? We talk about knowledge, nothing survives.
Yeah. Again, I'm a huge Graham Hancock fan, who's, I'm sure you're familiar.
Yes.
Considering the amount you read. So Graham Hancock talks a lot about how the ancient Amazonian culture was way more scientifically advanced than us.
Right.
So the argument that people usually throw at him is, if they were that advanced, where is the plastic?
Yes.
But what if that culture was so advanced that they realized the bad outcomes of plastic, that it harms the earth, and they decided not to even make it.
Right.
But instead they made other things like a super soil, which is capable of growing any plant anywhere in the world, which is there's actual records of the soil. The soil is found even today in those local tribal cultures.
Right.
Then obviously all the architecture, you see the pyramids which are hidden in the Amazon.
Right.
And the botany, the botanical sciences that they discovered.
Yes.
Maybe they work towards creating a very positive form of human life rather than just, let's create weapons and let's create plastic.
In fact, that reminds me, of a sort of a debate I had with another author in a lit fest, and where I was saying that people were there were these scientific advances, and he said they fought on chariots. How could they be scientifically advanced? And immediately the thought that came to my mind was, this because we have fossil fuel does not mean we are advanced, right? Fossil fuel is causing so much damage to the environment. Even if they were not aware of the fossil fuel, does not make them primitive.
Yeah.
They were using the technology which was in line with their environment. And Indian civilization has always been about having a balance, an equilibrium with their environment. It's not just, philosophically, if you go to the Upanishads, there's the balance between the inside and the outside world. And it is between the Atman and the Brahman and the Prakriti around you. So that beautiful equilibrium was maintained using a chariot, which will not happen using a jet today, which is guzzling fossil fuels and throwing so much of carbon dioxide emission into the atmosphere. So, people, when they start using, they judge the ancient civilizations using 21st century glasses. That's something which, again, as I started, you have to have an open mind. You cannot judge things based on your present perspective. You have to look at the bigger picture. And just because they did not have cars or fossil fuels does not mean they did not have technology. Yeah. There's mention of Vimans, like you said, Vimans, and not just one. Pushpak Viman is the one that everybody knows. There are other multiple Vimans that are mentioned. In fact, Pushpak Viman was not with Ravan. It was with his stepbrother Kuber. And Kuber was a ruler of Lanka. A lot of people again don't know this story, you know. So Ravan actually usurped the throne. He threw Kuber out of Lanka. He took his Pushpak Viman and he basically took over everything that Kuber had built. And Kuber was saved using 2 other flying machines. You know, and this is from the Uttarkand of the Valmiki Ramayana. There were 2 other machines, 2 other spaceships or airplanes, whatever you want to call them, that were used to take Kuber away from there. His minions, Yakshas, they basically helped him escape from there to the Himalayas. There is such flying machines mentioned in the Mahabharata. So there's this king called Shalva who attacks Dwarka in a flying machine. And again, so a lot of people have this question, how could they create something like this? And you know, the answer that I have is that they did not create it. They were given the knowledge to create this by an advanced civilization, again, possibly aliens, who were the Devas. So these people, the advanced civilization of Devas, they provided the knowledge to create this. Because whenever you find mention of Vimans, it's never a human that's creating it. The Pushpak Viman was created by Vishwakarma, who's the architect of the gods. The plane that the Shalva uses in Mahabharata was created by Maya Danav, who is the architect of the Asuras. So these are 2 other advanced civilizations who provided these machines to us for use. You know, it's like an advanced country, you know, a Western country providing arms and weapons and artillery to a third world country. It's the same thing.
You know, and this talk about Vimans got me thinking that, okay, can you actually build a plane without fossil fuels? And then you think of birds. Right? Like, how do birds fly? They basically have a certain kind of bone structure,
right,
and a certain kind of material that makes them up, which are the feathers, which probably hold air,
which is aerodynamically,
And just because the planes that we use in the modern day use fossil fuel, it probably means that there were definitely scientific advancements with respect to those planes.
Right.
But maybe no one just took a step back and thought, let's engineer them this other way.
Yes.
And you said different kinds of Vimans. That's basically what it is. Some would have been flown using fossil fuels. Some would have been flown using some other kind of engineering.
Right.
There's no limit to what engineering can achieve. And that's one thing I've learned as an engineer. That we are who thought 50 years back that, you know, we'd be able to do so much with our phones.
Completely.
So what stops you from thinking that maybe someone will engineer planes at some point in the future, which are completely independent of fossil fuels?
In fact, these Vimans were supposed to have a Mercury vortex. So they were supposed to run on Mercury. So imagine, Mercury is it's not a very easily available metal, and it also has a very semi-fluid texture, right? So how did they use it? That's the challenge to uncover. And somebody can try it, because there are people who have tested the models that are given. So there's something called the Vaimanika Shastra, which mentions the different type of planes, the different shapes. And some people, especially in the Western countries, they have tried building those shapes, small ones, and testing whether they are even aerodynamically stable, whether they can even sustain the wind currents and can fly in the air, and it's possible. But they haven't found the technology to decipher the Mercury vortex. But the shapes are aerodynamically possible. So there is knowledge which is available, but we need to dig deeper.
Technology and technological advancements are always a reflection of nature.
Right.
Like cameras are a reflection of the human eye. In so many ways, planes are a reflection of birds.
Completely.
But can we make a deeper reflection that truly is like a bird? Maybe another Viman could have been flown using Megafauna. Like we had that flying dinosaur. I think it was called Ptero something.
Pterodactyls.
Yeah, pterodactyls.
Yeah, I think.
So
Pteranodon.
Pterosaurus. I don't know.
But I just remember because my nephew is very fond of dinosaurs.
Yeah, same. I'm sure you are as well.
I am.
And I'm sure that, there must have been some overlap in that 60,000, 70,000 year time period, where there was megafauna present, which are large animals present at the same time as
humanity, probably. In fact, again, that brings me to another mythical creature called a Sharab. Okay, there's a creature called a Sharab who's supposed to be sort of this chimeric being and which has multiple animals' limbs or structures. The face is like that of a lion, the tail is like that of a peacock or stuff like that. The limbs are different and all. But that is, beyond the description, what it is supposed to do, it is the Kal of all animals. So it is supposed to be the ultimate predator in the food chain. So who could this be? Scientifically, it has to be a dinosaur, right? Who can even eat lions and tigers? There's only one animal who could have done that scientifically, historically. It's the dinosaurs. So the description might be different. In fact, so I travel for work, and I was once in Cambodia at Angkor Wat, and again, fascinating place. It's the biggest religious temple complex in the world. It's bigger than the Vatican. And this is an 11th century Hindu temple, which is now Buddhist because the country is Buddhist. But this was the 11th century Hindu temple, which was the biggest religious complex in the world at that time and even today. Okay, and there, in one of the temples, I think that's Angkor Thom, there's a carving on one of the doorways of a dinosaur, of a stegosaurus. So who would have known a stegosaurus? Even if it was done later, maybe 14th century, 15th century, even till then the dinosaurs were not discovered, right? So the discovery of dinosaurs and all the different varieties of dinosaurs happened much, much later in the 19th century, 20th century. But there's a clear-cut carving of a stegosaurus on a temple wall. What do you make of it? So there has to be some megafauna which survived.
I think we've discussed so many wide variety of topics, and people have got a nice introduction to Dr. Vineet Agarwal. But
I hope it was not too technical for the audience.
Beautiful. This was one of the most fun podcasts I've done. I think the podcast which kind of force you to kind of rethink history and rethink the way the world works are the most fun thought experiments. And that's what the listeners listen into the Ranveer show for. They want thought experiments. They want to be able to think and be stimulated. So this is one of the episodes which will keep growing with time, which will be discovered by people 10 years later, 20 years later, I feel. True. Maybe let's end this particular conversation with one topic that intrigues me immensely. This is a whole other podcast, but maybe you can give us a brief kind of outlook on what this topic is all about. Kalki Avatar.
That's one of my favorite topics.
I think
we need to have a separate podcast for that.
It can be a separate Hindi podcast at some point.
Sure.
But maybe you can brief us a little bit.
So, interestingly, again, as I said, a lot of world mythologies have very common features. There's this great deluge, which is there in all world mythologies, most world mythologies. A lot of world mythologies talk about the thunder god, which is Thor in Norse mythology, Indra in Hindu mythology, Zeus in Greek mythology. A lot of world mythologies talk about the universal egg, the Brahmand that we call. So very, very common threads running in most of the mythologies. And one of these is the return of a Messiah. Okay, so the return of a savior. Because a lot of religions, they realize, and in even modern religions, even Islam and Christianity, we're not talking just about the Greek and the Romans and the Egyptians, but a lot of modern religions also, all of them, they have this concept of the Messiah returning. So Kalki, even Buddhists, in the Tibetan Buddhism, they believe that there would be a king. I think they're called the Kulika kings, not Kalki exactly, but Kulika kings. And there have been a succession of these kings. And the last of these would bring in a change, would usher in the golden age, exactly like our Kalki is supposed to do. So Kalki is a very fascinating concept, I would say. And so various people look at it in different ways. Some people believe that, humanity is just so discouraged with its own efforts that they need an external savior, right? To save themselves, from themselves. They need an external savior. So again, that's a psychological concept or philosophical concept that we don't really need to get into. But the scriptures do mention the return of Kalki. They do mention the return of the Lord as the last and final avatar for this yuga, which would be Kalki. And Kalki is supposed to return towards the end of the Kali Yuga. So for Hindu timeline, it's a long way away. But when you're going to the Buddhist, Tibetan Buddhist scriptures, it's supposed to happen somewhere around 2424 AD. So it's not that far, maybe another 400 years or so. And Christianity also talks about the coming back of the Messiah. Buddhism talks about the future Buddha as Maitreya Buddha. who would be coming. If you've been to Ladakh, there's this massive statue of Maitreya Buddha there, which is a tourist spot. And similarly, even in Islam, there's this concept of a Messiah coming. I'm forgetting the name, but there is a concept, not Prophet Muhammad, but another prophet, returning to bring back civilization into and give it the right direction. So a lot of these concepts are there. So again, it either is a prophecy that was heard by humanity when it was all together and not broken up into different cultures and communities, or it is a hope for a better future that somebody will come someday to save us from what we are doing to us. So I think that's my take on Kalki. But scriptures do mention that this is an event that would happen.
Yeah. I think this is worth a whole other podcast.
Yes.
So this is the first time you and me are talking to each other, and we were already kind of doing our own mini podcast in the other room, and I said, no, hold up, we'll do all this on screen.
Right.
I think let's head into our Hindi conversation, and for all the English listeners, I hope you enjoyed it. I hope you share it, and also now that you know Doctor, maybe the next time he's coming on the show, ensure you engage on our Twitterverse section and send in your questions, because again, I've just scratched the surface based on my own interests.
Right.
So you've been running this blog for 10 years. I can't imagine the amount of knowledge you've accumulated.
Yes, I think that's been my journey of learning. I never say that I'm an expert in any of these topics, but it's been a process of learning for myself, because the more you dig, and there's so much more to read, there's so much more to learn. We have thousands and thousands of scriptures, and all of them encourage you to ask questions. That's the beauty of our religion, that's the beauty of our scriptures, that you are encouraged to ask questions. You are not told this is how it is and you have to follow it. No. I would just wrap it up with this beautiful verse, the mention of the beautiful verse called Nasadiya Sukta in Rigved. And this verse, it ends that the God who's made all this, this, I'm just paraphrasing, that the God who lives in the highest heaven, who's made all this, maybe he only knows how creation happened, what happened, how did things progress. But the next line is, or maybe even he does not. That's such a beautiful scientific thought, which the supposedly religious scholars are making. I think that's the scientific inquiry we have to live with.
True knowledge is knowing that you know nothing.
Exactly.
Let's end this episode. See? I told you guys. There's so much more in this world of Indian culture / Indian mythology that's way beyond the world of the Mahabharata and Ramayana alone. There's so many more concepts. There's so many more theories. There's so many more aspects to history which is very likely lost. History where we've not discovered the archaeological evidence associated with it. History that was burnt away when our libraries and our universities were burnt during invasions. That's the kind of history that our generation and every Indian generation that follows us needs to rediscover. It begins with content like this that's available on the internet, free of cost, hopefully forever. And this mission about spreading knowledge about Indian culture will get accelerated by your shares on WhatsApp, on social media platforms. Make sure you share this podcast as much as possible, and make sure you follow the Ranveer Show on Spotify. Every episode is available on Spotify 48 hours before it's available anywhere else in the world. Dr. Vineet Agarwal will be back on the Ranveer Show very soon. But for now, check out some of our The Ranveer Show Hindi episodes that we created with this man if you enjoyed this conversation. Thank you. Lots of love.
बात करें अगर आज इसी सेकंड हाफ वीडियो की, तो इसमें जो है काफ़ी ज़्यादा जो नॉलेज है ना हमें वो मिला आइस एज के बारे में, फिर उसके बाद जो डिफरेंट छोटे छोटे वाक़यात हैं ना उनके बारे में।
मैं कहूँगी कल कम्प्लीटली एक मल्टीवर्स का कॉन्सेप्ट दिया गया था, उसको बहुत अच्छे से इलेबोरेट किया गया था। और आज अगर हम लोग देखें तो आज डिफरेंट चीज़ों को जो है वो मैं कहूँगी कि बड़े अच्छे तरीके से एक्सप्लेन किया गया। जैसे कि कल भी हम लोगों ने देखा था, बट कल हम लोगों ने डिस्कस नहीं किया था सोम के बारे में, जो कि ब्रेन था उसके बारे में हम लोगों ने नहीं जिक्र किया था। बट छोटा सा मैंने ये डिस्कस जरूर किया था कि जहां तक मुझे समझ आती है कि आपको थोड़ी एनर्जी देने के लिए मे बी उसका इस्तेमाल किया जाता होगा उस टाइम पे। जैसे कि हम लोग देखते हैं कि लाइक जैसे मतलब जो देव होते हैं,
हाँ।
मतलब वो लोग भी तो यूज करते थे ना, ड्रिंक्स वगैरह यूज करते थे।
ये मुझे बिल्कुल आइडिया नहीं, लेकिन हाँ ये मैं बात करूँ जड़ी बूटियों की बात की जाए ना, जहाँ पर तो जड़ी बूटियों की बहुत हिस्ट्री रही है। अगर आज से हम इनके जब से सही वो रिकॉर्ड्स बनना शुरू हुए ना, उसके बाद से अगर हम देखें जड़ी बूटियां बहुत सारे जो हैं वो सिविलाइजेशंस में डिफरेंट इवन कि वो ग्रीक हो या इंडस सिविलाइजेशन हो या कोई भी हो, वहां पे आपको इस्तेमाल उसका होते हुए एज ए मेडिसिन आपको नजर आएगा। अभी तो हम क्या नाम लेते हैं आके इन चीज़ों से बहुत ज़्यादा दूर हो चुके हैं ना, हम एलोपैथी की तरफ जा चुके हैं, हम वो जो एक पूरी एक मशीनी दुनिया है हम उसमें बस चुके हैं। लेकिन अगर पुराने वक्तों में बात करें, जो हकीम जिन्हें कहा जाता है या क्या नाम लेते हैं, जो इस तरह के लोग होते थे, वो जड़ी बूटियों का ही इस्तेमाल करते थे।
मैं ये बोलूंगी कि अगर अभी का हम टाइम देख रहे हैं तो मुझे लग रहा है कि हम ग्रेजुअली रिवर्ट हो रहे हैं उन चीजों की तरफ जा रहे हैं, क्योंकि अभी वैदिक चीजें जितनी है लोगों का इंटरेस्ट हो रहा है और लोग जो है बहुत ज्यादा अवेयरनेस भी क्रिएट कर रहे हैं उसके बारे में। इवन कि अभी आज के टाइम में भी हम देखें, जैसे हम लोगों को सर्दी लग जाती है तो हम कोई ना कोई एक नुस्खा इस्तेमाल करते हैं जिसमें कोई ना कोई हम जड़ी बूटी डाल देते हैं या कुछ ऐसी चीज डालते हैं जो कि हमारे लिए बहुत ही अच्छा होता है। तो आई थिंक लोगों को फिर भी कहीं ना कहीं पर थोड़ा बहुत मैं कहूंगी कि नॉलेज रह गया है, और वो भी मे बी बड़ों से एक आपको ट्रांसफर होती है चीजें, तो आप सुनते आते हो तो आपको पता चलता है। लेकिन उसके बाद एक दो चीजें मेरे लिए बहुत नई थी, क्योंकि हम लोगों ने रामायण देखी है, चाहे बहुत ही हम कहेंगे कि उसको ऐसे लिमिटेड फॉर्म में हम लोगों ने देखा है, लेकिन मुझे बिल्कुल भी आइडिया नहीं था कि जो हनुमान जी हैं वो 3 से 4 मरतबा गए हैं। हम लोगों को यही पता था कि वो 1 मरतबा में गए हैं और उनको पता नहीं चल रहा था कि कौन सी वाली जड़ी बूटी लेकर आनी है,
और वो
तो
पूरा पर्वत जो है वो उठा कर ले गए।
फिर उसके बाद जो रावण के भाई वाला है जो कि कुबेर के बीच में जिक्र हुआ, जो सर उनका स्टेप ब्रदर था, उसके बारे में भी हम लोगों को नहीं पता था कि मतलब एक्चुअल में जो जितनी भी किंगडम थी वो उसकी
कुबेर की थी, और जो है वो रावण ने हत्या ली थी। अच्छा, वैसे ये चीज भी जो है बड़े लंबे अरसे से चलती आ रही है, और जो सिविलाइजेशन अगर बात करें, जैसे आप जिक्र किया गया साउथ अमेरिका की तरफ जो माइग्रेशन हुई और जो एक स्ट्रेट था उसकी अगर बात की जाए, तो नो डाउट आप यूएस और जब रशिया के बीच का फर्क देखते हैं ना, वो इतना ज्यादा फासला नहीं है उस साइड से। वो वैसे ही हमें देखने को लगता है यार रशिया कहाँ पर, अमेरिका कहाँ पर, लेकिन आई थिंक हार्डली वो 55 या 53 किलोमीटर का वो एक डिस्टेंस है अमेरिका से। और क्या नाम लेते हैं, जैसे वाटर बॉडीज का भी जिक्र किया गया बीच में और सिविलाइजेशन का भी जिक्र किया गया। अभी भी हम जो बड़े बड़े शहर देखते हैं अभी वो आपको दरियाओं के किनारे ही मिलेंगे। वो अलग बात है दरियाओं में अब उस तरह पानी का बहाव नहीं रहा, डैम्स बना दिए गए, बहुत सारे रिसोर्सेज को रिजर्व कर दिया गया, लेकिन अभी भी सिविलाइजेशन, जैसे अगर हम बात करें दिल्ली की बात करें, लाहौर की बात करें, अगर चिन्योट की बात करें जो शहर में इस टाइम जहन में आ रहे हैं, जेहलम की बात करें, तो ये वो शहर हैं जो दरियाओं के किनारे ही बसे हुए हैं।
बिल्कुल। अच्छा, बीच में इस चीज को मैं इस तरीके से भी अब आकर सोचती हूँ कि मुझे ऑनेस्टली पहले आइस एज के बारे में इतना बिल्कुल भी इतना क्या मुझे नहीं पता था। मुझे ग्लोबल वार्मिंग का पता था क्योंकि अभी वही चल रही है तो उसी के बारे में डिस्कशन होती थी। लेकिन जब से वीडियोस देखना शुरू हुए हैं हम लोगों को भी पता चलना शुरू हुआ कि आइस एज भी एक टाइम हुआ करता था। लेकिन मुझे ऐसा लगता है कि ना ये एक चक्र है जो वाकई में चलता रहता है। अभी जैसे कि अभी ग्लोबल वार्मिंग का टाइम चल रहा है, तो अभी जैसे हम लोग बड़ा सारे एक्टिव हो गए हैं कि हम लोगों को पोल्यूशन कम करनी है, दरख्त ज्यादा लगाने हैं, ऐसी चीजें नहीं इस्तेमाल करनी जो कि नेचर को हार्म करें। तो फिर क्या होगा, फिर आहिस्ता आहिस्ता मिलता धीरे धीरे टाइम जो है ना वो सेटल होता जाएगा और फिर आइस एज वाला टाइम आता जाएगा।
अच्छा, वैसे आइस एज की बात की जाए तो बहुत सारी मूवीज ऐसी हैं जो आइस एज पर बनी भी हुई हैं, लेकिन जब वो मैं मूवीज देखता हूँ मैं क्या यार ये कैसे ऐसे हो सकता है। हाँ, अगर आप नॉर्थ पोल वाली साइड पे चले जाएं, साउथ पोल वाली साइड पर चले जाएं, वहां पर आपको ये चीजें देखने को मिलेंगी, लेकिन रियलिटी में अगर हम जिस एरियाज में रहते हैं यहाँ पर तो कभी हम इमेजिन भी नहीं कर सकते। फिर उसके बाद जो लंबी लंबी रातें, 6 महीने दिन 6 महीने रात, ठीक है ना, अगर उसकी बात भी की जाए तो बहुत देर पहले मैंने इसके बारे में सुना था कि एक पॉइंट ऐसा है, आई थिंक आप जब इधर ये क्या नाम लेते हैं रशिया वाली साइड पे ऊपर जाते हैं या नॉर्वे वाली साइड पर, हाँ नॉर्वे वाली साइड पर ऊपर जाते हैं तो वहां पर एक एरिया है जहां पर जो है बहुत लंबे अरसे तक दिन रहता है, बहुत लंबे अरसे तक रात रहती है।
हाँ एग्जैक्टली। मेरे रात का तो मुझे इतना आइडिया नहीं है, लेकिन दिन वहां पर बहुत लंबा होता है। ये मैंने सुना था, तो मेरे जहन में जब नॉर्थ वाली बात हो रही थी ना, तो वही वाली चीज आ रही थी। बट ये कि अगेन हम लोग चीजों को पढ़ते नहीं है और उतना ओपन माइंड के साथ नहीं पढ़ते जिस तरह से हम लोगों को चीजें समझनी चाहिए और सुननी चाहिए। आई थिंक ज्यादा प्रॉब्लम ये है हम लोगों की कि हम लोग ना बहुत जल्दी चीजों का मजाक बनाना शुरू हो जाते हैं, बजाय उससे कि हम लोग उसको समझें बहुत ज्यादा डेप्थ में जाकर कि इसका इस तरह से क्यों हुआ होगा, क्या इसके पीछे रीजन रही होंगी। पता नहीं क्यों मैं तो जितना इन चीजों को बारे में पढ़ती जा रही हूँ ना, मेरा तो बिलीव काफी फर्म होता जा रहा है इन चीजों को लेकर कि हाँ, उस टाइम पर ऐसी पावर्स हुआ करती थी लोगों के पास जो इतने ज्यादा, हम कहेंगे कि मतलब ऑब्वियसली वो एक डिफरेंट टाइम हुआ करता था। अभी जैसे हम लोग बात करें, एक बहुत ही ऐसा टाइम चल रहा है जहां पर लोगों के जो कर्म हैं वो अपना धर्म पूरे से नहीं निभा रहे, तो डेफिनेटली उसके मुताबिक हमारे जो हम असरात भी जिंदगियों में हम लोग को नजर आते हैं। लेकिन उनका थोड़ा लाइफस्टाइल डिफरेंट रहा करता था, क्योंकि वो और तरह के, जैसे कि विमान की बात की जाए कि जैसे उन्होंने बीच में बात बोली कि बहुत सारे लोग जो इन चीजों पर यकीन नहीं करते कि जो विमान है वो कैसे वहां उस टाइम पर बन सकते हैं। पर मुझे ऐसा लगता है कि जब हम लोग टेम्पल्स देखते हैं या हम लोग कोई भी एंशियंट चीज देखते हैं, जगह देखते हैं, उन पर जो चीजें बनाई गई हैं या फिर जो जिस तरीके से हम कहेंगे कि चीजें रखी गई हैं, जो दोबारा से मतलब रिसर्च हो रही है और सामने आ रही है, तो मैं ये बात सोचती हूँ, अगर लोग इतने एडवांस नहीं होते तो मतलब वो वैसे ही तो नहीं ना मतलब बना सकते थे चीजें। डेफिनेटली उनके पास कोई ना कोई सोर्स था उस टाइम पर कि उन लोगों ने आने वाले लोगों के लिए इस फॉर्म में हम कहेंगे कि एक प्रूफ जो है वो रखा कि ये चीजें उस टाइम के लोग भी इस्तेमाल किया करते थे।
यार मैं अगर बात करूँ ना, जैसे टेम्पल्स की बात की, तो आप जैसे बीच में एक वो दिखाई भी गई तस्वीर दिखाई गई, तो समटाइम्स आप जब देखते हैं ना इस तरह की चीज़ें, तो आप वाकई हैरान रह जाते हैं कि उस टाइम पर ऐसी चीज़ें हुआ करती थी। तो उन लोगों ने जो है वो उसको प्रिंट किया, उसे यानी कि लाने बात है, अब स्केचिंग का तो वो होता नहीं था, तो पत्थर को तराश कर जो है वो चीज़ें बनाई जाती थी और बताई जाती थी आने वाले नस्लों के लिए। जो है वो एक जो है यानी कि
हम कह लेंगे जिस तरीके से
ट्रेस छोड़े जाते थे कि आपको पता हो कि उस टाइम पर क्या चीजें थी। अभी जैसे बहुत सारे टेम्पल्स या बहुत सारी चीजें ऐसी हैं जो आप देखते हैं ना, तो आप वाकई यहाँ से ब्लैंक हो जाते हैं कि भाई ये कैसे हुआ होगा। जैसे कि अभी हमने बीच में एक जो मनु वाली जो बात हमने बीच में सुनी कि जिस तरह वो एक इंसिडेंट हुआ, तो क्या नाम लेते हैं, जब हम इस तरह चीजें सुनते हैं ना तो आप रिलेट कर पाते हैं चीजों को।
बिल्कुल। अच्छा, मनु वाला जो था वो मैंने पहले सुना हुआ था, इसलिए मुझे उसके बारे में आइडिया था कि मतलब विष्णु जी वाला मुझे इसके बारे में मैंने पहले पढ़ा हुआ था। लेकिन मुझे ये नहीं पता था कि जो कश्ती नहीं, कि जो फिश है उसके मतलब ऐसे ऊपर एक हॉर्न बना होगा और उसके साथ बांध के तो जो है वो कश्ती जाती है। लेकिन दोबारा से जिंदगी कैसे स्टार्ट करनी है ये विष्णु जी मतलब बताते हैं। और इसके साथ साथ जो लास्ट वाला पॉइंट था कल्कि वाला, तो मैं सबसे पहले तो मैं थैंक यू बोलना चाहूंगी कि वीडियो में इस चीज को क्लियर किया गया, क्योंकि जब भी मैं कभी इस तरह से बात करती हूँ, क्योंकि ये हकीकत है कि बहुत सारी चीजें जो हैं हम लोग रिलेट कर पाते हैं सुनकर। तो हम लोग को कमेंट सेक्शन में ना बहुत सी चीज सुननी पड़ती है कि आप लोग इसको नहीं रिलेट कर सकते या आप इसको कंपेयर नहीं कर सकते। हम कंपेयर तो करते नहीं है, हम लोग सिर्फ एक चीज बताते हैं कि हाँ, हम लोगों ने भी ऐसा सुना है, हमारे बड़े भी हम लोग ऐसे बताते हैं, हमारे फेथ में भी ऐसी चीजें होती हैं जो हम लोग सुनते आए हैं बचपन से। हम लोग वो सिर्फ एक चीज शेयर कर रहे होते हैं अपनी आपके साथ। अदरवाइज क्रिश्चियनिटी में देखें बिल्कुल ये है चीज। और मैंने जहां तक वीडियोस देखी हैं और मतलब चीजें ऑब्जर्व की हैं, मैंने ये चीज नोटिस की है कि हर रिलीजन में या हर फेथ में एक चीज है कि जो कि आपको डिफरेंट नामों के साथ जो आपके सामने आती है।
जैसे बोट वाली बात की जाए,
बोट वाली बात भी एग्जैक्टली की जाए तो उसके बारे में भी हम लोग एक स्टोरी हम लोग देख रहे थे, तो हम लोग रिलेट कर पा रहे थे। फिर उसके साथ साथ मैं कल की अवतार की यहाँ पर स्पेसिफिकली बात करूंगी कि जैसे कि इस्लाम में भी बिल्कुल बोला जाता है कि आएंगे एक मसीहा आएंगे जो कि दुनिया को सेव करेंगे जब बहुत बुराई फैल जाएगी। हाँ, तो ये सारी, और वो टाइम बहुत अच्छा भी होगा ये भी कहा जाता है। तो मुझे ये चीज लगती है कि ना हम लोग एक्चुअली में ना पढ़ते नहीं है कि सबको क्या बताया जा रहा है, हम सिर्फ ये यहाँ तक ही अपने आप को लिमिटेड कर लेते हैं कि भाई जो हमारा है और जो हमें बताया जा रहा है ना बस वही सही है। मुझे लगता है कि एक वाइडर पर्सपेक्टिव से भी चीजों को सोचना चाहिए और देखना चाहिए, तो चीजें काफी ज्यादा इजी हो जाएंगी समझने में। वेल ओवरऑल काफी इंफॉर्मेटिव वीडियो थी, बहुत अच्छा लगा देखकर, और आई होप कि आने वाले टाइम में हमें और ऐसे पॉडकास्ट सुनने को मिले, क्योंकि बहुत सारी चीजें नो डाउट ऐसी होती हैं जो आपको फर्स्ट टाइम सुनने में इतनी ज्यादा समझ में नहीं आती, लेकिन जैसे ही आप उसको मजीद सुनते जाते हो तो फाइनली आप उनको डाइजेस्ट करना शुरू हो जाते हो, आपको समझ भी आती है कि किस कॉन्टेक्स्ट में बात की जा रही है। तो ओवरऑल बहुत ही अच्छी वीडियो थी एंड आई होप आप लोगों को भी अच्छी लगी होगी, और आपका क्या कहना है इसके बारे में जरूर बताइए कमेंट सेक्शन में। और अगेन जाते जाते मैं ये जरूर कहूंगी, अगर आपको कहीं पर लग रहा है कि हम लोग इसको अच्छे से समझ नहीं पाए किसी भी पॉइंट को, तो वो भी जरूर कमेंट सेक्शन में हमें बताइएगा, या आप हमें ईमेल कर सकते हैं। और इसी के साथ हमें इजाजत, हमारे वीडियो
लाइक, सब्सक्राइब, शेयर,
गुड बाय।